There are increasing reports this weekend that the ANC and EFF coalitions at local government level are in trouble. The ANC recently said it would be reviewing arrangements and looking to sever some ties. EFF leaders have since instructed some of their members to relinquish positions where the party co-governs with the ANC. Let's move this conversation forward now. Bring in political analyst Professor Susan Booysen. A very good evening to you, Professor. Good to have your time. So there's been a lot of toing and froing, a lot of talk about this apparent break in the relationship between the ANC and the EFF at local government level, yet we've not seen a clear-cut breakup. Why is that?
Yes, we really see this kind of toing and froing at this stage because there are two parties that are really depending on each other. The ANC in a range of hung municipalities where it needs a significant block of voters and a block of a party that represents a block of voters like the EFF, where the ANC needs more than just top up from a minimal party. There are so many of those municipalities among the hung municipalities, and the EFF in turn depends on the ANC because the ANC could leverage the EFF into positions of power. And so we see this mutual dependency of these two parties that are actually competing very hard for the allegiance and 2024 votes of so many voters out there. Those perceptions of the voters are incredibly important. And in a run-up to these elections, it's very important that especially the ANC, who is outright majority, may very well be in the balance. The ANC wants to appeal to those voters. So we see mutual dependency and competition between these two parties in a period that is very important in South African politics. We probably possibly or probably see the ANC moving from majority party to a minority party.
Does either party, though, need one more than the other needs it?
It is probably a case of almost dead equal balance between these two parties. The ANC really needs the EFF in many places, and here we're talking provincially, in provinces like KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and nationally. The ANC could very well depend on the EFF to get it back into power. And, of course, it will depend on what the ANC manages to get in the election, whether it can just do with minimal top-up or whether it needs a slightly bigger party, but still a minority party like the EFF. So, in many respects, the ANC needs the EFF more than the EFF needs the ANC, because the ANC only matters to the EFF in some grand scheme of being leveraged into power when it's by far not an outright majority party. So I would say the ANC really needs the EFF. And we also, of course, see this in a context where the ANC in so many of these hung councils around South Africa, basis of 2021 local government elections, the ANC got pretty close to power but depended on the EFF to come in there. And the ANC also depended on smaller parties, many of these smaller parties, think of, for example, of GOOD, the Pan-Africanist Congress, or the UDM. Many of these smaller parties have been coming to the rescue of the ANC in councils, and there could be analogies to provincial governments here for next year's elections, but those parties are fading, and the ANC cannot be certain that those parties could be strong enough to help it get that top-up support. And it's also in this context that we see, just in the last week in a strategic framework that the ANC NEC released for its approach to coalitions, that we see the ANC emphasizing community parties, community-based organizations, service delivery forums, independent candidates as targets for the ANC going into next year's election, where we look at parties, possibly new entities in the electoral contest, nationally and provincially, which are not so entrenched in current coalition cultures in South Africa. So in a way, the ANC has run out of coalition partners, and it looks at the innocence in the political process to possibly help it get back into power. Should it indeed fall short?
Right, Prof. How then does the EFF take that difficult position that the ANC is facing and use it to its advantage? Because the EFF has been clear, even speaking at a recent gathering here in Gauteng, the party leader, Julius Malema, described the EFF as a government in waiting, but the reality is, given voter trends, it would need a significant amount of support, or in fact to stick it out with the ANC to make it, because the other coalition parties which have come together in their own pact have made it clear that they're not going to work with the EFF.
Yes, the EFF here really finds itself in a very, very difficult position, because it will obviously not be aligning with the charter group around the DA and the other 6 parties so far. So it's not aligning in that way, and many other EFF has also elicited the response from the DA that the DA says it will not be working, it will not, never, of course, it's a short time in politics, but it seems to be serious point being made by the DA that it will not work with the EFF. And the EFF, when it talks about itself as being in power, that it has a strategy to be in power, it really, really depends on the ANC to get it to fall short enough of an outright majority so that it needs a party the size of the EFF, possibly between 15 and 20% come next year's election, should it manage to get its voters registered and out to vote. So the EFF really needs the ANC totally for its strategic objectives in the elections, but we also know the EFF is not close to that, so one cannot take the EFF too seriously when it says that is on the verge of taking power.
And how much of a complication, I wonder, Professor Booysen, do local politics pose at this point to what happens nationally if indeed the ANC fails to get an outright 51% majority in next year's election?
I think local politics poses a big problem for the ANC, especially in terms of voter perceptions, as we move from a bigger group, as recently seen, of local government coalitions, into extending that field possibly into provincial and maybe even national level. Because what the voters have been seeing is very erratic behavior of political parties, including the ANC at this stage, which is coming with high-level, good-sounding proposals as to how coalitions should be controlled, managed in future. And yet we know that many of the strategic approaches that the ANC is proposing at this stage, as we've seen in last week's proposals, those actually go directly against what we have seen the ANC practice in local government coalitions in recent years. So the ANC has got a lot of ways to go if it should re-establish credibility in the eyes of the voters when it comes to its undertakings for coalition politics, possibly in provincial and national spheres.
Professor Susan Booysen, political analyst, good to get your views as always. Thank you for your time tonight.